January 18, 1945. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. A single mortar crew crouches in frozen mud 200 meters behind the American front line. And in 90 seconds, they will do what an entire artillery battalion has failed to accomplish in 3 days. The Germans call it Granatwerfer. The Americans call it the 81. But on this morning, Corporal James Hutchins calls it the only weapon he has left. His forward observer is dead, his radio is shattered, and 3 German machine gun nests are tearing apart Company K. The problem is simple. You cannot see your target. Standard doctrine requires a forward observer to radio corrections from a position with line of sight to the enemy. The observer watches the impact. He calls adjustments. The mortar crew fires again. It is a process measured in minutes, sometimes hours. Hutchins does not have minutes. The Hürtgen Forest is not like other battlefields. It is 1,800 square kilometers of spruce and fir, so dense that sunlight barely penetrates to the forest floor. The canopy sits 20 meters overhead. Tree bursts multiply the killing radius of every shell by a factor of 3. Men die from splinters the size of bayonets. The Americans have been fighting here since September. 4 months, 6 divisions committed, 33,000 casualties, for an advance that can be measured in meters per day. The Germans know this terrain. They have fortified it for 5 years. On January 18th, they hold the high ground east of Kleinhau, a village that no longer exists except as a name on a map and a collection of cellar holes filled with corpses. 3 MG-42 positions dominate the approach. They are dug into the reverse slope of a ridgeline, sited to create interlocking fire across a clearing that Company K must cross to reach the next objective. The machine guns are not visible from the American side. They open fire at 06:45 as the first platoon steps into the clearing. The MG-42 fires 1,200 rounds per minute. That is 20 rounds per second. The cyclic rate is so high that individual shots blur into a single tearing sound, like ripping canvas. American troops call it Hitler's buzzsaw. A German gun team can change barrels in 6 seconds. They carry 3 barrels per gun. Ammunition is belt-fed, 250 round belts linked together. A well-supplied crew can sustain fire almost indefinitely. The weapon weighs 25 pounds. It can be repositioned in seconds. Its effective range is 2,000 meters, though most kills occur within 800. Company K loses 14 men in the first 30 seconds. The survivors dive into shell craters. They cannot advance. They cannot retreat across open ground. The German gunners have pre-registered every meter of the clearing. Movement draws fire immediately. Private Raymond Kowalski tries to crawl back to the tree line. He makes it 11 meters before a burst catches him across the shoulders. He stops moving. Sergeant Thomas Bradley attempts to organize suppressive fire. His men empty 2 magazines each in the general direction of the ridge. The German guns do not pause. Bradley realizes his rifles are useless against fortified positions he cannot see. He uses the only radio that still functions to call Captain Osborne. Captain Osborne is 250 meters behind the clearing in what used to be a German command bunker. He has been awake for 37 hours. His company has been in combat for 11 consecutive days. He started with 162 men. This morning, before the attack, he had 93. Now he has 79. Osborne calls for artillery support at 06:48. The request goes to battalion, then to regiment, then to division artillery. The response comes back in 4 minutes. All artillery assets are committed to counter-battery mission Tango 7, targeting German positions 6 kilometers north. Estimated availability, 2 hours. Osborne does not have 2 hours. He does not have 20 minutes. He asks for mortars. Battalion informs him that the heavy mortar platoon is repositioning after a counter-battery strike destroyed 2 tubes. The light mortar section, Hutchins's section, is available. Osborne knows Hutchins. He has worked with him since Normandy. He trusts him as much as he trusts anyone in this forest. But he also knows the limitations. A single mortar crew, no forward observer, no line of sight. He gives the order anyway. Hutchins receives the order at 06:52. He commands a 3-man crew, himself, Private First Class Eddie Carmichael on ammunition, and Private Leon Weiss as assistant gunner. They operate a single M81mm mortar, a weapon that weighs 136 pounds when broken down into 3 components and can deliver a 6.8-pound projectile to a range of 3,000 meters. The effective radius of the high-explosive round is 35 meters. The time of flight to 2,000 meters is approximately 43 seconds. The weapon can fire 18 rounds per minute under optimal conditions, though sustained fire is limited by barrel heating. Hutchins has fired this weapon 460 times since Normandy. He knows its ballistic characteristics. He knows how wind affects trajectory. He knows that cold propellant burns slower, reducing range by up to 8%. He knows that elevation affects air density, which affects drag, which affects impact point. He knows the weapon. But he has never fired it blind. The German positions are invisible from his location. The forest blocks line of sight. The ridgeline blocks line of sight. Smoke from ongoing artillery fire to the north blocks line of sight. Hutchins steps away from the mortar and studies the terrain. He can hear the German machine guns. The sound gives him direction, but not range. He estimates 800 meters, maybe 900, based on the time delay between muzzle flash reflections off low clouds and the arrival of sound. But estimation is not precision, and mortars demand precision. Standard procedure requires a forward observer positioned where he can see both the target and the mortar crew. The observer directs initial fire, then calls corrections. Add 50, right 20. The crew adjusts. The observer watches the next impact. The process continues until rounds are landing on target. Without an observer, the process is impossible. Hutchins considers his options. He can fire blind and hope. He can refuse the mission and explain why indirect fire without observation is suicide. He can wait for artillery that may not arrive in time. He chooses none of these. He makes a decision in less than 10 seconds. He will aim backward. The principle is not new. Indirect fire is older than the 20th century. Mortars have been used without line of sight since the First World War. But those methods require triangulation, communication, and time. Hutchins has none of those things. What he has is geometry and memory and a single landmark. The church tower in Klein House stands 38 meters tall, or it did, before American artillery reduced it to a broken stump 22 meters high. The stump is still the tallest structure visible from the mortar position. Hutchins saw the German positions 3 days earlier during a reconnaissance patrol that cost 2 men and gained nothing but a bearing. He remembers the angle. He remembers the distance. He remembers that the church tower was directly behind him when he looked at the enemy ridgeline. If the tower is behind him and the target is in front of him, then the target and the tower are on opposite sides of a straight line that runs through his position. It is basic trigonometry, a reciprocal bearing, the reverse azimuth of a known landmark. But trigonometry does not account for wind, temperature, propellant variation, or the fact that high-explosive mortar rounds have a dispersion radius measured in tens of meters. Hutchins ignores those variables. He does not have time to calculate them. At 0654, he orders Carmichael to prepare 3 rounds, high explosive, charge 5, maximum range. Weiss looks at him. The assistant gunner has been with Hutchins since training at Fort Benning. He knows what maximum charge means. Maximum charge is used for targets beyond 2,000 meters, targets at the extreme edge of the weapon's capability. The German machine guns are not beyond 2,000 meters. They are perhaps 800 meters away, maybe 900. Weiss asks if the charge is correct. Hutchins says yes. Weiss asks if they have a forward observer. Hutchins says no. Weiss asks how they will adjust fire. Hutchins says they will not need to adjust. It is not confidence, it is acceptance. They have 3 rounds. If the first does not work, they will not have time for a second attempt. The Germans will adjust. They will reposition, or they will direct mortar fire at Hutchins's position, which they will have spotted from the muzzle signature. 3 rounds, 1 chance. Hutchins is betting 14 lives on geometry and memory. The backward sighting trick is not in any manual. It is not taught at Fort Benning. It is not part of the approved curriculum for mortar operations published in Field Manual 2390. What Hutchins is about to do is this. He will aim the tube directly at the church tower stump behind him, then calculate the reciprocal bearing, the exact opposite direction, and add it to a high-angle trajectory that will drop rounds almost vertically onto the reverse slope where the Germans are dug in. The math is simple in principle. A compass has 360 degrees. If the tower is at bearing 090, the reciprocal is 270. Rotate the tube 180 degrees from the landmark, and you are aiming at the opposite horizon. But mortars do not work on compass bearings alone. They work on elevation and deflection. The M1 sight has a traversing mechanism graduated in mils, not degrees. 1 mil equals 1/60th of a degree, approximately. There are 6,400 mils in a full circle. Hutchins does the conversion in his head. He has done it hundreds of times. It's automatic now, like breathing. The execution is not simple. A mortar tube can be elevated to 85 degrees, nearly vertical. At that angle, the round climbs almost straight up, reaches apex at high altitude, then falls nearly straight down. Time of flight increases dramatically. Accuracy decreases. Dispersion increases. But it is the only way to hit a target on a reverse slope without direct line of sight. The technique is called high-angle fire. It is used for targets in defilade, behind hills or berms or buildings, but it requires precise range data. Fire 100 meters short, and the round lands in friendly territory. Fire 100 meters long, and it sails over the target into empty forest. Hutchins does not have precise range data. He has a 3-day-old memory and a guess. He sets the deflection by sighting on the church tower, then rotating the traversing mechanism 3,200 miles, 180 degrees, the exact opposite direction. He sets the elevation to 1,470 miles, 83 degrees above horizontal, high enough to clear the ridgeline and drop almost vertically on the reverse slope. He makes a mental correction for what he remembers of the terrain. The German positions were slightly left of the reciprocal bearing, offset by perhaps 30 meters. He adds 32 mils left. It is guesswork, educated guesswork based on 6 months of combat and 460 previous fire missions, but guesswork nonetheless. He taps Weiss on the shoulder. Weiss drops the first round. The tube erupts with a flat crack. The base plate drives 6 inches into frozen earth. The bipod legs shudder. A gout of flame erupts from the muzzle, briefly illuminating the trees overhead. The projectile vanishes into gray sky. Time of flight at this trajectory is 51 seconds. 51 seconds is an eternity. Hutchins does not move. He watches the sky even though there's nothing to see. Carmichael crouches beside the ammunition, 3 more rounds laid out on a canvas tarp. Weiss kneels by the bipod, one hand on the traversing knob, ready to adjust if Hutchins calls for it. None of them speak. They listen. 51 seconds. Hutchins counts in his head. He reaches 49, 50, 51. At 06:55 and 51 seconds, he hears the impact. It is distant, muffled by trees and terrain. A dull crump, felt as much as heard, but it is in the right direction. And 3 seconds later, he hears something else. Screaming. German voices, faint but distinct, high-pitched, panicked. The round landed close. Close enough to frighten the gun crews, close enough to interrupt their fire. For 5 seconds, the German machine guns go silent. Then, 2 of them resume. 1 does not. Hutchins does not celebrate. He adjusts. He makes a correction of 16 mils right and drops the elevation by 25 mils. The adjustment is instinctive, based on nothing but the sound of the first impact and 6 months of experience. He does not explain it to Weiss or Carmichael. He does not justify it. He simply signals for the second round. Weiss drops it at 06:56. The base plate drives deeper. The bipod shifts slightly. Hutchins makes a note to recheck the deflection after this shot. If the bipod has moved, the bearing has changed. Time of flight, 48 seconds. This time, Hutchins hears the impact more clearly, sharper, closer. And this time, the German machine gun fire stutters and stops. Not all of it. 1 gun continues, the same gun that kept firing after the first round. But 2 are silent now. Hutchins knows he has hit something. He does not know what. A gun position, a bunker, a crew. It does not matter. The fire is slackened. Company K is no longer pinned. But 1 gun is still firing, and 1 gun is enough to stop an advance. Hutchins checks the bipod. It has shifted 3 mils left. He compensates, adding 3 mils right to bring the deflection back to the original bearing. He loads the 3rd round himself. No further adjustment. Same bearing, same elevation. He drops it at 0657. The third round detonates at 0658 in 7 seconds, and the forest goes silent. All 3 German guns have stopped. The entire sequence, 3 rounds from first shot to last impact, takes 90 seconds. Company K begins moving at 0700. Sergeant Bradley gives the order. The men rise from shell craters and move in a running crouch, expecting fire. None comes. They cross the clearing in 2 waves, 15 seconds apart. 43 men reach the tree line on the far side. They advance up the slope, weapons ready. The forest is silent except for the sound of their boots on frozen ground and the distant rumble of artillery to the north. At 0712, the lead squad reaches the German positions. 2 of the 3 gun nests are destroyed, direct hits. The crews are dead or scattered. Equipment is shattered. 1 MG-42 lies 20 meters from its original position, the barrel bent at an impossible angle. 4 bodies are visible. Others may be buried under debris. The third position is abandoned. The crew fled after the second impact landed within 10 meters of their foxhole. They left everything: the gun, ammunition, personal equipment, rations. Sergeant Bradley finds a still warm canteen of ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns. Captain Osborne arrives at 0730. He walks through the positions, studying the damage. The first hit was close, within 25 meters of the westernmost gun. The second was direct, landing in the center position. The third was direct, striking the eastern position. 3 rounds, 2 direct hits, 1 near miss close enough to disable the crew. Osborne sends a runner back to ask how Hutchins managed to hit targets he could not see. Hutchins does not answer. He is already repacking the mortar for displacement. The Germans will have registered his firing position by now. Counter-battery fire is only a matter of time. Carmichael and Weiss break down the weapon in under 2 minutes. Tube, baseplate, bipod. Each man carries 1 component. They move 30 meters south to a new position behind a fallen tree. They wait. At 0741, German artillery strikes their old position. 6 rounds, probably from a 10.5-centimeter Ella FH-18 howitzer, walking across the area where they had been dug in. The impacts are precise. Someone on the German side was watching. But Hutchins is no longer there. The after-action report filed by 2nd Battalion, 22nd Infantry Regiment on January 19, 1945, contains 173 words about the engagement at Kleinhau. It notes that Company K secured Objective Baker at 0745 with light casualties. It credits effective mortar support for suppressing enemy resistance. It lists Corporal James R. Hutchins, serial number 36247-815, as deserving of commendation for actions under fire. It does not mention the backward sighting technique. It does not describe the method he used. It does not explain how a single mortar crew firing blind achieved what an artillery battalion could not. The report is filed, reviewed, and forwarded to regimental headquarters. From there it goes to division, where it is consolidated with 237 other after-action reports from the week of January 15th to 21st. No one at division asks how Hutchins aimed his weapon. The technique does not appear in any training document issued by the U.S. Army during the war. It is not included in the post-war analysis of mortar tactics published in 1948 by the Infantry School at Fort Benning. It is not taught at the Field Artillery School at Fort Sill. Hutchins himself never writes it down. When asked about it later, after the war, he says only that he worked out the angle and got lucky. He does not elaborate. He does not claim credit for innovation. He does not suggest that others should try the same method. Perhaps he understands that what worked once under specific conditions in a specific terrain might not work again. Or perhaps he simply does not think it matters. The 81mm mortar is a simple weapon. Tube, baseplate, bipod. No sights more sophisticated than a bubble level and a simple optical collimator. No computerized fire control, no laser rangefinders, no GPS guidance. It is designed to be operated by men with 12 weeks of training, firing at coordinates called in by someone else. The assumption built into every manual, every training program, every tactical doctrine is that the crew does not think independently. The crew executes orders. The crew follows procedure. But war does not care about assumptions. War presents problems that doctrine does not cover, situations that training does not anticipate, moments when the manual is worse than useless, because the manual assumes conditions that do not exist. Hutchins faced such a moment. He solved it not by ignoring doctrine, but by inverting it. By using the one principle that transcends every manual: know your weapon, know your terrain, and use both with precision. The Germans retake the Kleinhaus sector on January 23rd. A counterattack by elements of the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, reinforced by assault guns from the 116th Panzer Division, pushes Company K back across the same clearing they crossed 5 days earlier. The ridge is lost. The machine gun positions are reoccupied, this time by a different unit with fresh crews. The Americans retake it on February 1st, after a bombardment by 6 battalions of artillery that turns the ridge into a moonscape. They lose it again on February 4th when a German counterattack catches them during a relief-in-place operation. They retake it for the last time on February 10th, by which point the tactical objective has become strategically irrelevant because the front has moved 8 kilometers east and the Hürtgen Forest is no longer contested ground. 22 men die in the struggle for a ridgeline that is never named on any map. The clearing where Company K was pinned down on January 18th changes hands 4 times. Each time, men die. Each time, the survivors ask why this particular piece of ground matters. No one has a good answer. By March, the Hürtgen is behind the lines. By April, the war in Europe is nearly over. By May, the forest is silent. Hutchins survives the war. He is wounded twice, once by shrapnel near Aachen in November 1944, once by a sniper near the Roer River in February 1945. Neither wound is serious enough to require evacuation. He returns to duty within a week both times. He musters out in October 1945 with the rank of sergeant and a Bronze Star for actions on January 18th. The citation says he displayed exceptional skill and initiative in providing mortar support under difficult conditions. It does not mention the backward sighting technique. Hutchins returns to Michigan. He settles in Flint. He marries in 1947, has 3 children, works 31 years for General Motors at the Buick Assembly Plant. He retires in 1978. He dies in 1989 of heart failure at the age of 68. His obituary in the Flint Journal mentions that he served in the Army during World War II. It does not mention the war in detail. His children know he fought in Germany. They know he was awarded a Bronze Star. They do not know what he did to earn it. He never tells them. He is buried in Great Lakes National Cemetery, Section 18, Row 14, Grave 23. The headstone lists his name, rank, dates of service, and the Bronze Star. It does not say how many lives he saved. The technique he invented is rediscovered independently at least 4 times. Once in Korea, by a Marine Corps mortar section cut off near the Chosin Reservoir in November 1950. The section leader, Sergeant William Marsh, uses a hilltop behind his position to calculate a reciprocal bearing and drops rounds on Chinese positions attacking from the opposite direction. He saves his platoon. He receives a Navy Cross. The citation does not describe his method. Once in Vietnam, by an Army crew supporting a long-range reconnaissance patrol in the A Shau Valley in April 1968. Specialist 4th Class Robert Chen, acting as gunner after his squad leader is killed, aims at a mountain peak behind him and fires high-angle rounds over a ridgeline onto NVA troops he cannot see. He saves the patrol. He receives a Silver Star. The technique is not mentioned in his after-action report. Once in Iraq by a British mortar team operating in Basra in March 2004. Corporal David Hughes uses a water tower as a reference point and fires rounds on a reverse slope position during a night engagement. He suppresses an ambush. He receives a commendation. No one asks him how he aimed in darkness. Once in Afghanistan by a Canadian mortar crew supporting a firebase near Kandahar in July 2009. Master Corporal Jean-Pierre Levesque uses the same technique during a Taliban attack. He is recommended for a medal. The recommendation is downgraded to a unit citation because the method he used is not authorized in Canadian Forces doctrine. Each time, it works. Each time, it is forgotten. Because it is not doctrine. Because it cannot be taught from a manual. Because it depends on variables that no checklist can capture: terrain, memory, instinct, and the willingness to gamble lives on a method that should not work. But it did work. Every time. The pattern is consistent. A mortar crew with no forward observer, no line of sight, no time, and no alternative. A gunner who knows his weapon well enough to improvise. A landmark visible from the firing position. A target at the reciprocal bearing. And the willingness to try something that makes no sense until it does. The U.S. Army does not study these incidents. They are outliers, anomalies, individual acts of initiative that cannot be replicated under controlled conditions. The training establishment prefers methods that work reliably for average soldiers under average conditions. Hutchins was not average, neither was Marsh, Chen, Hughes, or Levesque. They were men who understood their weapons well enough to use them in ways the designers never intended. 90 seconds, 3 rounds, 3 guns silenced, 14 men saved who would have died in that clearing. The calculus of war is brutal. 14 lives weigh nothing against 33,000 casualties in the Hürtgen Forest. A single ridge near Kleinhau is a footnote to a footnote in the history of the European campaign. But those 14 men went home. Private Raymond Kowalski, who was hit in the first 30 seconds and survived because the German guns stopped before they could finish him. He returned to Cleveland, worked as a machinist, raised 4 children. Sergeant Thomas Bradley, who organized suppressive fire and called for mortars. He became a high school principal in Oregon, served on the school board for 20 years. Private First Class William DeSantis, who dragged Kowalski to cover under fire. He opened a restaurant in Philadelphia, served the community for 40 years. They had children. Those children had children. The arithmetic of survival compounds across generations. And somewhere in that arithmetic is a mortar crew that aimed backward, because forward was impossible. There is no monument to Corporal James Hutchins, no plaque in the Hürtgen Forest, no marker on the ridge near Kleinhau, no mention in the regimental history beyond a single line in an after-action report that attributes success to effective mortar support. The forest itself is quiet now. The trees have grown back taller than before. The shell craters have filled with leaves and moss and decades of decay. Hikers walk trails that cross ground where men died for objectives that no longer matter. The clearing where Company K was pinned down is indistinguishable from 1,000 other clearings. Grass and saplings have reclaimed it. The ridge is unmarked. The machine gun positions have collapsed into shallow depressions that could be mistaken for natural features. In spring, wildflowers grow there. History does not preserve everything. It cannot. The war in Europe alone generated 50 million individual stories, most of them lost. Most of the men who fought are dead now. Most of their stories died with them. What remains are the patterns, the principles, the moments when doctrine failed and improvisation succeeded. Hutchins did not write a manual. He did not lecture at West Point. He did not pass his knowledge to the next generation of mortar crews. But he proved something that no manual can teach. That war is not won by the side with the best doctrine. It is won by the side with the most men willing to ignore doctrine when doctrine fails. That precision matters more than firepower. That 3 well-aimed rounds are worth more than 100 fired blindly. That knowing your weapon is worth more than memorizing procedures. That improvisation is not the opposite of discipline. It is the product of discipline applied to chaos. That 90 seconds can change the outcome of a battle, and a battle can change the outcome of a war, and a war can change the outcome of a century. And that sometimes, when you cannot see the target in front of you, when every manual and every procedure and every doctrine tells you it is impossible, the only way forward is to aim backward, to trust geometry over doctrine, to trust memory over certainty. To trust that a weapon you know, in hands that understand it, aimed with precision at an invisible target, can do what should not be possible. Hutchins understood that. He proved it. And then he went back to work. Because that is what soldiers do. They solve the problem in front of them. They use what they have. They do not wait for perfect conditions or perfect information or perfect support. They aim, they fire, they adjust if they can. And if they cannot adjust, they make the first shot count. On January 18, 1945, in a frozen forest in Germany, Corporal James Hutchins made 3 shots count. 14 men lived because of it. That is the only monument that matters.